On the morning of April 3rd, 2022, emergency services were called to a high-rise condominium in Miami's Edgewater neighborhood. The call reported a domestic disturbance inside an apartment at the One Paraiso complex. When officers entered the unit, they found 27-year-old Christian Abumseli suffering from a severe stab wound. Paramedics attempted life-saving measures, but he was pronounced dead at the scene. Court records state that Courtney Clenny was inside the apartment when police arrived. She had visible injuries and was treated by paramedics before being transported for questioning. Investigators immediately secured the unit and began documenting the scene. Police noted signs of a violent struggle inside the apartment. Furniture was displaced. Blood evidence was visible. Detectives treated the location as a potential homicide scene within hours. According to initial statements later summarized in court filings, Clenny told officers that she had acted in self-defense. She claimed an argument escalated and that she threw a knife at Abumseli during the confrontation. Investigators did not make an arrest that day. Instead, they began reconstructing the hours and days leading up to the incident, reviewing physical evidence, medical findings, and digital records connected to the couple. Within days, the case drew national attention. Clenny was a recognizable online personality with a large social media following. Abumseli's death inside a luxury high-rise raised immediate questions about what had occurred behind the closed door of the apartment. Police confirmed that the relationship between Clenny and Abumseli was already known to authorities. Prior calls for service at the same address had been logged before April 3rd. As detectives worked through the evidence, one central question guided the investigation: whether the fatal stabbing was an act of self-defense or the result of a pattern of escalating violence that had finally turned deadly. By the end of that day, Christian Abumseli's death was no longer being treated as an isolated incident, but as the starting point of a much deeper investigation.
You are watching Crime Insider. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and drop a like on the video.
That deeper investigation quickly moved beyond the apartment itself and into the lives of the two people who had lived there. Courtney Clenny was known publicly as an online model and influencer, posting lifestyle content to hundreds of thousands of followers. Her online presence presented a carefully curated image: travel, fitness, and luxury living, far removed from police reports and emergency calls. Christian Abumseli, known to friends as Toby, worked in the tech and cryptocurrency space. Records show the couple had been living together at One Paraiso for months before his death. Behind the social media posts, the relationship had already drawn attention from building security and law enforcement. Police logs and court filings show repeated disturbances connected to the apartment in the months leading up to April 2022. Officers had been called to the residence on multiple occasions to respond to arguments between the couple. Those incidents did not result in arrests at the time, but they established a documented history of conflict. Investigators later described the relationship as volatile, marked by frequent confrontations that escalated quickly. Neighbors told police they had heard loud arguments coming from the unit in the past. Building records confirmed that security staff had also intervened during disputes. Each incident added to a growing paper trail that would later become central to the case. Online, Clenny continued posting content as usual. There was no public indication that the relationship was deteriorating, but police records painted a different picture: one of repeated instability and unresolved conflict behind closed doors. By early 2022, investigators say the relationship was no longer viewed as a series of isolated arguments. Instead, it appeared to be a pattern, one that raised concerns long before April 3rd. On the evening of April 1, 2022, police were called to the One Paraiso condo complex in Miami's Edgewater neighborhood. The call came from building staff reporting a disturbance involving two residents in the lobby. According to police body camera footage later released, officers arrived to find Courtney Clenny standing near the building entrance, speaking rapidly and appearing distressed. Building employees told police they had intervened moments earlier after an argument escalated between Clenny and Christian Obumseli. In the footage, Clenny told officers she felt harassed and said Obumseli had been following her within the building. She asked officers what steps were required to obtain a restraining order and whether he could be prevented from approaching her. Officers explained that without a court order or an arrestable offense, they could not remove him from the property. Police separated the two in the lobby and spoke with each individually. Officers advised Clenny on how to document incidents and outlined the process for seeking a protective order through the courts. No criminal charges were filed during the interaction. After several minutes, officers cleared the scene. The call was logged, and both parties were allowed to leave the lobby separately. The encounter ended without arrests or emergency medical response. But the visit added another official record to the building's security and police logs, documenting a confrontation between the same two individuals inside the same residence. Inside the apartment, however, investigators believe tensions remained unresolved. Court filings state that the argument observed in the lobby did not lead to a permanent separation. Both Clenny and Obumseli continued occupying the same space. What happened during those 2 days was not witnessed by police, neighbors, or security staff. It was reconstructed later through evidence, statements, and forensic review. The gap between April 1 and April 3 became a narrow window investigators focused on closely. By the time officers returned to the unit, the situation inside had already reached its irreversible outcome.
On April 3, 2022, investigators began documenting the interior of the One Paraiso apartment, where Christian Obumseli had been found. The unit was secured, photographed, and processed as a potential homicide scene. Court filings state that the fatal injury occurred inside the apartment's kitchen area. Investigators documented blood evidence on the floor and nearby surfaces. Furniture in the unit showed signs of displacement consistent with a physical confrontation. According to statements later summarized by police, Courtney Clenny told investigators that an argument escalated inside the apartment. She said Obumseli approached her aggressively during the dispute. Clenny claimed she feared for her safety and said she threw a kitchen knife toward him from several feet away. Emergency responders reported that Obumseli had suffered a single wound to the torso. Despite medical intervention, he was pronounced dead at the scene. Investigators compared Clenny's account with the physical layout of the apartment. Measurements were taken to determine distances between the kitchen counters, doorways, and where Obumseli collapsed. Detectives also examined the knife recovered at the scene and documented its position relative to both individuals. Police noted that Clenny had visible injuries when officers arrived, including bruising and marks that were photographed and included in evidence logs. No independent witnesses were present inside the apartment at the time of the incident. There were no cameras covering the interior of the unit. As a result, investigators relied on physical evidence, medical findings, and Clenny's statements to reconstruct what happened. By the end of the day, detectives had collected all visible evidence from the apartment and completed an initial scene analysis. The findings were forwarded to medical examiners and forensic specialists for further review. At that stage, the incident remained under active investigation, with no immediate arrest made and multiple questions left unresolved based solely on what could be seen inside the apartment. The medical examiner's review focused on the single wound that caused Christian Obumseli's death. Autopsy findings documented a deep wound to the torso, with damage consistent with significant force. According to court records, the trajectory and depth of the wound were analyzed in relation to the knife recovered from the apartment. The examiner noted the injury penetrated vital structures, leading to rapid blood loss. Those findings were recorded alongside measurements taken at the scene. Investigators compared the medical conclusions with the account provided by Courtney Clenny. She had told police she threw the knife from several feet away during an argument. The examiner's assessment addressed whether the injury was consistent with that description. Prosecutors later stated that the wound characteristics raised questions about the mechanism described. The depth and angle of penetration were documented as part of the evidentiary record and forwarded to detectives handling the case. The autopsy also recorded additional injuries observed on Abumseli's body. As investigators moved beyond the apartment and medical findings, they turned to video evidence recorded months before April 2022. Those recordings did not show the final incident, but they documented how the relationship appeared in public spaces. One of the most widely cited clips came from a surveillance camera inside an elevator at One Paraíso. The footage, later released by prosecutors, showed Courtney Clenny and Christian Abumseli together in a confined space. In the video, Clenny is seen striking Abumseli repeatedly while he does not strike back. The encounter ends when the elevator doors open. Prosecutors described the footage as evidence of prior physical aggression. The video was time-stamped and logged as part of the investigative record. Defense attorneys did not dispute the authenticity of the footage, but argued it represented a single moment taken out of context. Investigators also reviewed a separate video recorded earlier in Aspen, Colorado. That footage, reported by local media, showed Clenny striking Abumseli during an argument outside a residence. The video was obtained through third-party sources and later included in court filings. Together, the recordings showed confrontations occurring in different locations and at different times. Detectives noted the similarities in behavior across the clips, documenting them as part of a broader evidentiary pattern rather than isolated incidents. In addition to surveillance and phone-recorded videos, police examined body camera footage from prior responses, including the April 1 lobby incident. Those recordings captured tone, posture, and verbal exchanges, but did not show physical contact inside the apartment. Investigators cataloged each clip, noting date, location, and source. The videos were preserved in their original formats and made available to both the prosecution and defense for review. None of the footage showed what happened inside the apartment on April 3, but taken together, the recordings provided investigators with visual documentation of how the relationship appeared during earlier confrontations. Later on April 3, 2022, Courtney Clenny was interviewed by detectives following her medical treatment. Detectives informed Clenny that Christian Abumseli had died from his injury.
Christian is dead. Oh my God. This is not real, right? Okay. No, there's no fucking way.
Video from the interview showed Clenny reacting emotionally, alternating between distress and periods of calm as questioning continued. During the interview, Clenny repeated her account of the incident inside the apartment. She said an argument escalated and that she acted out of fear. Detectives asked clarifying questions about positioning, distance, and the moments leading up to the stabbing. Her statements were recorded and preserved without interruption. Investigators also reviewed Clenny's physical condition at the time of questioning. Photographs taken earlier showed visible marks and bruising, which were logged as evidence. Detectives documented her demeanor, noting changes in tone and responsiveness as the interview progressed. Police did not place Clenny under arrest that day. After the interview concluded, she was released pending further investigation. Detectives continued gathering evidence, reviewing medical findings, and analyzing video material collected from multiple sources. In the days that followed, the case remained active. Investigators coordinated with prosecutors to assess whether the available evidence supported criminal charges. No public statements were made beyond confirmation that the death was under investigation.
In the months following Christian Abumseli's death, Investigators continued reviewing evidence gathered from the apartment, medical examination, and video records. Prosecutors evaluated whether the available material met the legal threshold for criminal charges. On August 10, 2022, Courtney Clenny was arrested in Honolulu, Hawaii, where she had been staying at the time. Authorities confirmed the arrest was made without incident. Clenny was taken into custody on a charge of second-degree murder with a deadly weapon under Florida law. Following her arrest, Clenny waived extradition and was transported back to Miami-Dade County. She was booked into jail and appeared before a judge for an initial hearing. Prosecutors formally outlined the charge, while defense attorneys entered a plea of not guilty on her behalf. The court ordered Clenny held without bond. Prosecutors argued that the severity of the charge and the evidence collected justified continued detention. Defense attorneys requested release conditions, which were denied at that stage. Public court records show that the charge marked a shift in how the case was officially classified. What had initially been investigated as a suspicious death was now being pursued as a homicide prosecution. No trial date was set at the time of the arrest. The case moved into a pre-trial phase, with motions, evidence disclosures, and hearings scheduled over the following months. As the case moved through pre-trial hearings, the central dispute became clear. Courtney Clenny's defense maintained that Christian Obumseli's death resulted from self-defense. Prosecutors argued the evidence told a different story. Defense attorneys stated that Clenny had acted out of fear during a confrontation inside the apartment. They pointed to her visible injuries, prior police calls, and her statements to officers as support for that claim. In court filings, the defense framed the incident as a single chaotic moment rather than a deliberate act. Prosecutors challenged that narrative. They cited medical findings, physical evidence from the apartment, and earlier video recordings as indicators of a broader pattern. According to prosecutors, the severity of the wound and the circumstances surrounding the incident raised doubts about whether the force used was defensive. During bond hearings, both sides presented competing interpretations of the same evidence. Prosecutors emphasized video footage showing prior confrontations and argued those recordings contradicted the idea of a one-time defensive reaction. The defense countered that the videos lacked context and did not reflect the dynamics inside the apartment on April 3. Judges reviewing the case focused on whether the defense argument justified release before trial. In multiple rulings, the court denied bond, citing the seriousness of the charge and the weight of the evidence presented by the prosecution. No determination of guilt was made during these hearings. The court's role remained limited to procedural decisions and evidentiary thresholds, not final conclusions. By the end of this phase, the case had taken on a defined shape. Two competing narratives now existed side by side, one centered on fear and self-defense, the other on escalation and intent, both set to be tested in a courtroom rather than resolved through pre-trial arguments.
While the murder charge moved forward, a separate legal issue emerged that briefly complicated the prosecution's work. Investigators disclosed that access had been made to Christian Obumseli's laptop after his death. Court records show prosecutors alleged the device was accessed without authorization. The issue drew attention because the laptop contained personal data and communications connected to the case. According to filings, the access occurred after Obumseli's death and involved individuals close to Courtney Clenny. In 2024, Clenny and her parents were charged in a separate case related to unauthorized computer access. Prosecutors argued the actions interfered with evidence connected to the homicide investigation. Defense attorneys challenged the charges immediately.
They argued that some of the material obtained by investigators was protected by attorney-client privilege. The dispute centered on whether law enforcement had improperly reviewed privileged communications while examining the laptop. A judge later ruled that certain communications were, in fact, protected. As a result, key portions of the evidence tied to the computer access case were excluded from use. Following that ruling, prosecutors dropped the laptop-related charges. The court's decision did not affect the underlying murder case directly. The homicide prosecution continued on its original evidentiary track, separate from the computer access issue.
By the time the laptop case was dismissed, it had already highlighted the complexity surrounding the investigation. Multiple legal threads were now running in parallel, each governed by different rules and standards, but all connected to the same set of events documented in April 2022. Separate from the criminal prosecution, a civil case was filed in Miami-Dade County seeking accountability through the courts. The lawsuit was brought by Christian Abumcelli's father, naming Courtney Clenny and multiple entities connected to the One Paraíso condo. Court records show the complaint alleged wrongful death and negligence. The filing asserted that failures in building security and management contributed to the circumstances surrounding Abumcelli's death. The suit named companies responsible for property operations and security oversight, alongside Clenny as defendants. Unlike the criminal case, the civil action did not focus on guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Its purpose was to determine liability under a lower legal standard and to seek financial damages. The allegations were laid out in formal pleadings, supported by incident reports, security records, and publicly available documentation. Attorneys for the defendants denied responsibility in their responses. They argued that the claims overstated the role of building staff and security measures, and that responsibility for the events inside the apartment could not be transferred to third parties. The civil case proceeded on a separate timeline from the homicide prosecution. Motions, responses, and hearings were scheduled independently, governed by civil procedure rather than criminal rules. By the time the lawsuit was underway, the case surrounding Christian Abumcelli's death existed in two courtrooms at once, one determining criminal responsibility, the other weighing civil liability, each addressing the same events through different legal lenses.
As the case progressed through pre-trial proceedings, Courtney Clenny remained in custody while awaiting trial. Court records show she continued to be held without bond based on earlier rulings that cited the seriousness of the charge and the evidence presented by prosecutors. Pre-trial motions focused on evidence admissibility, witness lists, and procedural matters. Attorneys on both sides filed arguments addressing what material jurors should be allowed to see, including video recordings, medical reports, and prior police interactions. Judges ruled on those motions individually, narrowing the scope of what would be presented at trial. Public filings confirmed that Clenny maintained her plea of not guilty. Her defense continued to assert self-defense, while prosecutors stood by their position that the evidence supported a second-degree murder charge. In court updates reported through 2024 and 2025, a trial date was set for April 27, 2026 in Miami-Dade County. Prosecutors indicated the case would rely heavily on documented evidence rather than eyewitness testimony, given the absence of witnesses inside the apartment. The court scheduled additional pretrial conferences to address outstanding motions and logistics. No jury had been selected, and no testimony had been heard. At this stage, the case remained unresolved. The evidence had been collected, the charges defined, and the legal arguments outlined. The final determination of what happened inside the One Paraíso apartment now rested with a future jury under the standards of criminal law. The death of Christian Abumcelli left an impact that extended beyond court filings and evidence logs. As details of the case became public, reactions spread quickly across news outlets and online platforms. For many observers, the case was unsettling not only because of the charge, but because of the contrast between public image and private events. Coverage focused on how a relationship documented through police calls and video footage had ended inside a luxury high-rise apartment without witnesses. Obumseli's family responded publicly through legal filings and statements issued by their attorneys. His father described the loss as permanent and personal, emphasizing that behind every charge and motion was a life that could not be recovered. The family sought accountability through both the criminal case and a civil lawsuit, using the courts as the only available forum for answers. Public discussion often centered on the warning signs visible before April 3, 2022. Commentators pointed to prior police responses, security footage, and unresolved disputes, raising questions about how escalating conflict can remain contained behind closed doors. At the same time, the case became a reference point in broader conversations about domestic conflict, self-defense claims, and how authorities respond when repeated disturbances stop short of arrest. While the legal process continues, the outcome has already shaped those left behind. Christian Obumseli's death is recorded not only in court documents, but in the absence felt by family members and in the public record of a case that remains unresolved. What happened inside that Miami apartment is now a matter for the courts to decide. Between claims of self-defense and evidence of escalation, the line between justice and injustice remains sharply contested. What do you think about the evidence, the arguments, and the way this case has been handled? Share your thoughts respectfully in the comments below. If you value fact-driven true crime without speculation, like this video, subscribe to Crime Insider, and stay with us as we follow more cases like these.